With Sean.
All right. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Great seats.
Were they good seats?
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
Excellent.
Sure.
I like this casual, Sean.
Yeah, I like the casual shirt too.
Looks less official. And look, 'cause I think I have June 6th open too.
Are we on?
We're on. Great. Welcome to the April 16th Finance Committee meeting. Before we get into the agenda, we have a new member tonight, getting closer to our
I forgot.
count that we're hoping to get a 9. We have Liggy Suzadelis. Welcome. I don't know if you met everybody besides Sean.
Just met Sean.
All right, good.
Before he showed up, I thought I'd be making the difference in making a quorum, but
No, you gotta stay. You're stuck now. So the, tonight we're gonna jump into the budget.
I don't know, I think Deb said everybody has a copy. Did you make copies? Did you distribute copies?
I didn't make copies, I assume they all printed out there.
Oh, I didn't print mine.
It took me about, how many weeks to, okay. Well, before I do that, I'm gonna do one thing.
I got my own
know I'm
copy.
very
You
good
came
paperwork
prepared.
here, but I'm going to give you another, it's just another way of looking at the same budget, column through. One of those, and then I'll get into the narrative that Karen wrote.
We all have it. We all have it electronic.
That's fine, yeah, that's fine. Still obligated to explain it anyway.
Yeah, we would like that.
What I'm passing out here is a different way of looking at the same information. Basically, put it all on one page. I've been kind of working off the same format that's been derived before me, so. But you see one thing, the first column, the last column is, I'm not suggesting that we or anyone else proponents of cutting specifically across, but departmental lines on a percentage basis, but it's helpful exercise to at least see what those numbers look like. So that's the only reason it's here.
So that would be what it would take to get us to balanced?
Yes.
Okay.
And as of yesterday, I think the update I sent you was including the most recent updates in state aid. Currently, we've got about a $666,000 projected gap to fill before town meeting. So, and what comprises that gap, the information that you'll find it. What I gave you was updated by about $48,000 in state aid, additional state aid, and there was also one little tweak in the budget itself. There was a cost of living increase that we put in the building inspection budget that should have been taken out because it's not a level service and it's not a contractual requirement. So the document you have right now is the most up-to-date in terms of projected expenditures, but once again, that leaves us with a $665,900 gap going in FY15, which obviously we can't have. So, but let me explain. I'm going to work off the narrative that I sent people. Everybody had a chance to read that, right? We did this okay. That's a lot of paperwork. But just, I'm going to do my best to summarize it. First of all, the financial team, as we call it, we actually call it financial officers group because I like the acronym. And, this includes the assistant town manager, town accountant, assistant town manager, town accountant, treasurer collector, deputy assessor, and our school superintendent and assistant school superintendent. We've been meeting on a weekly basis now for the last couple of months, sometimes more than once a week. Just to continue to monitor a number of things. Number one, the development of the state aid, because we all have our own resources at the state level, et cetera. So, and to also discuss areas that we feel we can continue to reduce the projected, reduce from the departmental requests for next year. Some of the larger issues that are still out there that there's really not much left on the revenue side. I mean, we think for the most part, any changes in projected revenue are going to be incremental to this vehicle. It would be a nice surprise if the Senate does something with the budget that's over and above their, the joint resolution that's already been had. I think it would be rather unprecedented and nothing we should expect. So when you see the most up-to-date revenue in my email that I sent you yesterday, that is probably close to what we're probably be finishing with in terms of the revenue projection. From a budget standpoint, that's out of the budget. And if you want me to interrupt it, let me just kind of do my spiel on everything, go back and recount. It's completely up to you how I'm not getting at this. But some of the expenditure issues that are different or a notable one, I did increase the reserve fund a little bit. I was hoping we could be more aggressive with that. As I note here, in my opinion, it's the reserve fund, I'm sure you all agree too, the reserve fund for a almost $43 million operation is extraordinarily small. What the right number is, I'm not sure exactly, but it's more than $20,000. So there is still something in there for that. The other issues moving for the police and fire contracts, there's no police contract in place for FY15. You probably know that there's been no contract in place since fiscal year 12, so FY15 would actually be the last year of the contract that doesn't exist right now. So that is under negotiation, and I really don't want to say much more about that, only because well, for obvious reasons, I don't want to compromise the town's position on that. The increase in the fire budget is significant, and I think there's probably some significant opportunity moving forward here before the next couple of weeks to make some reductions there. The COLA for the fire union this year is only 1.5%, but there was a lot of other contractual changes with lower costs. So that's the biggest issue with regard to the public safety of the budget for next year, public safety departments. Right now, the school budget is projected at a 4.8% increase, and that's essentially a level services budget. A couple things to note there is that the tuition for the Norfolk County Agricultural School comes out of their operating budget, and they don't know at this point. They have to guess as to what the tuitions might be, and those plus transportation, and that can be, from what I'm told by the school administration, can be significant for a student, upwards of 15,000 to 20,000, including transportation. So obviously, 5 students versus 8 students or 11 students is a big deal. So as the weeks go by, they get a better idea of how many students have been accepted or maybe choosing to go there. So hopefully there is some opportunity there to reduce the 4.8% and still have a level service and not an actual cut in the budget. Clearly the number has to come down, and all know that to make the budget work. The other factor is the circuit breaker reimbursement should be a little bit higher than had been originally projected. It looks like the House budget does include some additional funds. It's still not fully funded, still an unfunded mandate in many ways, but the original reimbursement rate of 60% will probably be at least 65%. So we're actually having a meeting tomorrow, follow-up meeting, our regular weekly meeting, and so we'll be doing the math on that to see how much that might help close the projected gap at this time too. One other thing that has to do with not so much the school budget, but some of you, I'm sure, have had a chance to see the latest and greatest cherry sheet information. But the assessment, there's 2 sides of the cherry sheet from the state, as you know. There's the revenue side, the local aid, and there's also the assessments. And something that I don't know that we've mentioned in the past, but the assessment for the town of Abington for the charter school sending tuition is $431,000, which is up about $90,000 over the last year. So without anybody doing anything, the town is already losing $90,000 from our local aid for sending tuition to charter schools. So You know, those things, you know, when you're talking about a $600,000 change problem, and a significant chunk is completely out of our hands. And the school superintendent has actually described it a little bit as a death spiral. Sounds a little doom and gloom. In some ways it is, and I know some of you heard this too, that, you know, as students, as this Abington School Department budget suffers more and more, students look at other options, parents of students look at other options, whether it be agricultural school, whether they be the VOTEC, or whether it be charter schools. And all those students that leave the system draw disproportionately on the school budget. Those funds essentially, they may not come directly out of the school budget, but they clearly have an impact on the ability of the town to fund the existing public school department. So once again, these are all mandates by the state that we're supposed to be paid for and not hurt the quality of the local public education. And they all actually have a significant impact on that. So hopefully, as the economy improves a little bit and the state budget improves a little bit, they'll start meeting some of these requirements that, again, it's a backhanded way of dragging almost $100,000 out of the school budget in this one item alone. So it's just something, it's an aside from the budget itself, but it is a significant factor that I want people to at least be aware of. So those are so again, the 4.8% current projection for what is basically a level services school budget, hopefully can be reduced significantly once there's a clear picture of what type of out-of-district tuition costs have to be incurred. And the snow and ice over expended, I'm sorry, did I skip from? I'm sorry. I did, I wanted to the next page. South Shore VOTEC, they are meeting tonight, I believe, the school committee, and we have made a request for them to review their budget. Their budget currently is increasing by 4.5%, which is not, you know, an outrageous number. Unfortunately, about almost 14% of that, an increase of about 14% of that comes to the town of Abington because of the student population that we comprise, as well as the minimum aid formula, the minimum contribution formula that the state has. We have nothing to do with the minimum aid formula, the minimum contribution formula, but the math, and we've sat down with the school superintendent now twice, and the math is very clear that even if the South Shore VOTEC budget were exactly the same, our assessment would go up $150,000 based upon that formula. Right now, it's projected to go up $283,000, so there are a lot of budgetary categories, including capital, that they have some ability to reduce that would assist Abington and some of the other communities. The way it works is that about 25%, for every dollar that they cut from their budget right now, would save Abington about 25 cents on that dollar. So to the extent that there's might be some room there, that's important to help them close this gap a little bit too. So again, $283,000 is the additional assessment that's projected right now for next year. So, and the school superintendent has really been great to work with. I know you all met with him, but you know, they're trying to do what they think is right for their district also. And as you know, there's Abington children over there, but once again, the disproportionate shift of funds away from the town's public school system is a real concern in these several categories that I've talked about. Veterans benefits, as you are painfully aware, we're on pace to spend about $180,000 this year in veterans aid. Some of those cases we hope will be falling off. Next, we have approval to go to a veterans district. At the next selectmen's meeting, I expect that we'll go into municipal agreement with Whitman for a district. And then we'll be off recruiting for a staff. Right now, the $70,000 that we started the year in FY14 for veterans benefits, the budget for next year, I've put in an even $100,000. That is not clearly a conservative number. we hope with some of the cases that might be dropping off, as well as with a different regional administration, that there'll be some opportunity to control those costs a little bit more. It is a little bit of a risk factor right now for us for next year, but it's one of those areas that you really are just very concerned about putting money into that until we learn a little bit more about how this is going to work. Another reason why, if I had my druthers, we'd have a much healthier reserve fund. I'd rather have the money available for the finance committee to move around as necessary. The current library budget has only been, by me to date, has only been reduced in terms of a recommendation to meet the minimum requirements before they would need to file for a waiver. The amount that was put in there over and above was for non-union raises. One of the things that's important to me, and I know the finance committee voted to support it, was it about $6,000 to perform a third-party wage and classification study. So you can't have it both ways. You know, it's hard to recommend increasing some salaries before you do the work that everybody's supporting be done. So that's essentially all that's been reduced from the library budget versus the request. Whether or not it's sustainable, and whether or not there'll be some percentage reduction that requires a waiver filing, it's been done before. It's done most years in recent times, so that's something that it's not out of the question that their expense budget may have to be cut to make ends meet.
So Rick, that 458, 234, that's the bare minimum then, to hit anything less is the waiver.
Is correct.
Okay.
Doesn't mean they won't get the waiver. In fact, I'm sure they would get the waiver.
Yeah.
But okay. And moving forward into the miscellaneous area, and one of the healthy three things is we've got a zero increase in health insurance this year. Don't know how many years that's sustainable, but it was fairly modest this year. Next year it's zero, primarily because the Mayflower Health Group has a fairly healthy trust fund built up, and rather than increase rates, there's different ways to look at it. You can increase rates and then do what's, something like a premium holiday where people don't have to pay the last month of the year. There's different ways to approach it, but it's hard to build up trust fund. People don't pay taxes to build up trust fund for health insurance. So right now, the board has voted a 0% increase for next year. Our other miscellaneous items, though, there is a significant increase in property and casualty liability insurance line item, which is primarily due to a workers' comp increase of about $50,000. Some of you may know that 2 years ago the town switched its carriers from Maya to a different insurer, and that was done for many reasons. Primarily because there was the opportunity to move to a carrier before a particular year of really bad claims would catch up to you. It was going to catch up to us. We had three relatively, not relatively huge claims. A couple of the DPW in particular. So eventually the history catches up to you. There's no way to hide it. And so that doesn't mean we won't be looking at, as the year goes on at other, we've got the vendor we used prior, there's other carriers. So that's something we're going to continue to keep an eye on. Unfortunately, it is what it is. Your experience is what it is, and every carrier is going to assess using the formula that the state requires. Okay, snow and ice, we have averaged about 400,000 for the last several years. It's kind of remarkable that that's about what it's going to be again this year. We're about within $10,000 of that, so we had conceptually many months ago thought about let's pick a number that's kind of close to the average. it's kind of amazing that, considering the winter we've had, that we're actually in that ballpark. So what's in there should be enough. Right now, the amount we reserved is $400,000. So that's what's affecting next year's budget process, $400,000. If it goes up, it'll only be minuscule at this point, because I don't know that we're gonna get any significant snow. Another snowstorm wouldn't significantly change where we are right now, so I know, I hate saying this stuff because,
Did they need to treat anything this morning?
no. So as far as, I don't know at this point, well, I don't think, I would have liked to have made some progress in actually funding the budget for snow and ice. I had hoped that if we came in somewhat under the amount we had conceptually reserved, we could move that to the budget side and have a kind of a zero impact on the budget process, but that's not going to happen, so. So those are the major areas in terms of what you see in terms of I call it a preliminary recommendation, because really what it is a level services budget, but there's still a gap to be closed. So hopefully there'll be some effort we can, on the school side, when we learn more and more about out-of-district tuitions and there's also, I think, some opportunity particularly with our fire budget to make some more progress here. There's also what I'm thinking of doing is, even though it's in here right now, the full salary for a highway superintendent, one of the things that I know everybody's aware of is that we're looking at getting special legislation to change our charter to create a Department of Public Works. If that's filled from within that job, which may or may not be possible, that would obviously save some salary, but even if it's not, we still have it's still going to be significantly into the fiscal year before that position would be filled permanently anyway, after a legislative process and a job search. So it's not, I will likely be looking at the highway department budget salary line as an opportunity in the next several weeks to help fill this gap too. Whether it be half of $50,000 to $60,000 of the salary and benefit package. So those are some of the larger areas that start to add up rather quickly as we close the gap here.
So looking at the bottom right, the 665, 926, you've mentioned a couple places where we think there might be some meat left from the schools, the VOTAC, the highway. What do you think with all those that would go down to? Just throwing wild numbers.
You're not going to hold me to this. We're not on the public record or anything, are we? I would hope that with little damage to the organization, I would hope that we could cut that in half. One of the discussions we've had in our FOG group, we'll have it again tomorrow, is we came into this process, and the one thing that I've never been in a situation of having to do is use, again, one-time funds for a budget. And this year, this current fiscal year, the town used $536,000. And at least overtly to offset that amount of snow over expenditure, around a catastrophic year, so to speak, of snow and ice removal. When you remove that from the projected revenue over last year, we're essentially working with including some of the fixed costs against that, like pension. We're really looking at almost a zero revenue growth here. So what I would entertain is some use of savings for one more year. And I suggested this to the selectmen Monday night, and I was waiting for hearts to stop. So something in the $250,000 range of stabilization. But I think if everybody's willing to do that, I think there has to be some understanding and some agreement that we have to do everything we can to stem the increase in salary inflation for FY60. Because, using stabilization is one thing, but we have to do it in a way that we're clearly weaning ourselves off it. That I don't think we can, you can't sustain this year after year using it. The good thing is, as everybody's aware, last year we used $536,000 and we placed more than that amount later in the fiscal year at the town meeting. So the stabilization fund is healthier than ever. Hopefully we can do the same thing after free cash is certified again this year. So I think that a target figure for further reductions versus any other minor revenue offsets would probably be in the $400,000 range of reduction, to close that gap. And that has been a piece of the discussion we've had in our morning meetings. But again, the point is we have to, the salary levels in this town are as you know, and you've heard this before, in terms of school salaries, they're right in the percentile that they want to be in. The department head salaries, I think if you were, one of the reasons we want to have some work done on that is that they fluctuate, but in the end, any savings there, not big money, not the kind of stuff, again, that impacts the budget process significantly. So I think we have to have some collective agreement between school officials and all of us that we have to target a salary inflation that we're not willing to compromise with. Overall, I don't mean, someone gets a 2% raise, someone gets a 4%, there's a step increase. Bottom line salary inflation, when all factors are considered, is I think what we have to target for 2016 so we can at least wean ourselves off use of this seasonal gap plugging of stabilization. I know this is the first year it's been done, but at least that's my understanding. It was a sizable number, and you just can't replace that revenue. You just can't replace that revenue. We're all disappointed that, by the state of the state, I think in total we're looking at almost a minuscule amount of additional state aid this year, even though their collections and revenue estimates have been met and exceeded dramatically. Local government used to be the sacred cow. I'm not sure who it is right now, but it's not us, at least this coming fiscal year. So there's some reason to believe that in FY16 and beyond, as the economy continues to recover, state aid will have some ability to maybe recover a bit. I know a lot of you, I think all of you probably get the Beacon, except for Lou. And there was, I think, a really good article which I printed out today, and I can email to people if you didn't get a chance to look at it. But it's something that I know, it's something I've noted before. Those of us who have been at this a while, it's painfully clear that state aid as a percentage of municipal operations is at an all-time low since Prop 2.5 was adopted. So what used to be, a 35, 40% input of revenue from the state, primarily to fund education, is now down to a fairly, I forget, I actually don't know one of the documents, 28%. And that's big money, that's big money. So we were actually rather optimistic that this year would be somewhat of a growth year, but it's not a growth year, it's more of a net loss year, even though there's a little more actual dollars being provided. So that's the overview. That's the overview. I don't know. I'm sure you have questions, but
Because I don't remember it. What historically happens when there's a change in administration? Do they come in and start pushing the aid numbers up? Do they?
Well, it depends on the economy. For instance, Governor Patrick did not have the advantage of a great economy, but he was helpful in dealing with some management rights as they pertain to things like health insurance, et cetera. Governor Weld did back to the 90s, had a good economy and was really instrumental in a huge recommitment of local aid and reform. And reform law came into being around that time. The Weld Salucci administration was very, very good to local government. But once again, it was a sign of the economy, and although the gains have long since been wiped out, the problem isn't just that the local aid, is appropriated, it becomes part of your budget, and a lot of times it's as well as other dedicated local aid, it's designed to provide a service, and a service that you're still legally obligated to provide even when the money's not there anymore. So it's really in many ways a setup for failure. And I don't want to say that we've achieved that. I think we've done better than failure, but it really is, it's a difficult situation because you're not relieved of the mandates that aren't being funded, you're not relieved of the need to still provide levels of service. You just don't have the funds that were it's like losing your job and still having to pay a mortgage. I mean, that's really what it is. So that's the good news. So if we can try and close this gap, I don't see how it's going to be done without whether I don't want to call them layoffs, but it may be a combination of not filling some positions, or again half filling them, or the timing of when those are filled. Those things can help us offset some of our gap. That's what I'm hoping, because the one thing we don't want to do, as you all know, is lay people off because they have to spend money to save money. And we're a direct payer, so when somebody claims on insurance, it comes directly out of the town budget before we don't pay into the state system, so it's on a payroll basis. So you have to lay off 3 to save the money from 2. So we don't want to do that. It's an unproductive way to have to save money unless you're looking at it as something that is a relative or a pretty permanent reduction if you can get away with it. So. I hear the crickets. This isn't good.
It's people's thoughts.
I mean, I know this isn't a big surprise to anybody who's been following it month by month, but I do appreciate your patience because I know you have an obligation to make a recommendation, as do I. I've been trying to be very cognizant of the need to work with, particularly with the school officials and the public safety departments. It's easy to just go in and make a recommendation, this is the number. I know that's been done by some in the past, been done all over the place, but that's not, that's not the way I want to start my tenure with telling people what it's going to be. Because in the end, what it's going to be is what town meeting says it's going to be. And so having some uniformity of opinion is I think, very, very important.
As far as the schools, with their things that they're, their expenses that they're looking to cut, have they taken into consideration that $75,000 that was going to be maybe the warrant article? So has their book
Yes,
expenses been taken down by $75,000?
It
So
has.
that's already in
Yes.
here?
Yes.
Okay. What about any other items that may still be sitting in that same budget that hasn't been used? That's, like we put in, like I said, that sat there for a couple of years, not being used. Is there any other money in that particular,
Talking about article.
In the capital-
Appropriated article funds that are unused.
that are unused? There may be some, maybe there's not any, but it's worth maybe taking a peek at.
Yeah, I don't have, obviously, I'm not prepared to give you a good answer, but I can assure you that tomorrow, that'll be one of the issues for our group to discuss.
Could be peanuts, it could be nothing, but, there could be something.
Mhm. And if I had a writing instrument, I would write that down. Thank you, sir. Times are tough.
Nothing from this end of the
Obviously,
table?
we have to be careful with those at one-time funds, but to the extent that you can target those for those types of.
But that's a kind of expenditure that you're only gonna really use once once you replace textbooks. I know some you have to replace every year, like those workbooks and things, but if you're gonna replace science textbooks or math textbooks, they're not gonna be replacing those like every single year. So it's, maybe the one time, kind of figure out which ones you need that you're not gonna keep replacing year after year after year.
And we will take a look at it. I know one of the tasks that the town accountant engaged in 6 months plus ago was to try and clean up the books from some of the old articles that have been around for quite some time and closed out those to ideally, well, they'll become free cash for this coming year, and anything was closed out at that point. But we will review that again.
Okay.
Does any of this make sense to you? If you would like, at your leisure, we can set up a more of a one-on-one or a group meeting to help get you as caught up as
I'm
possible.
fine so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
What are people's thoughts on stabilization? And I'm looking at this and the 665 coming down to half. And then you mentioned 250 in stabilization,
Yeah.
which I think does a lot to close that.
It does. It doesn't close it without some
Mhm.
harm. But again, when you look at some of the large expense categories, like out-of-district tuitions that can add up real quickly, it's hard to know exactly what the number would be that doesn't create layoffs. It's hard to know exactly. That's why that's kind of a target figure that is a little bit of a, it's a little bit, I don't want to call it a little bit arbitrary. I think that's doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's a number that would seem to be reasonable both in terms of some sense of fiscal reality and maybe fiscal and political acceptability in light of what was done last year. And in the general ballpark, it would minimize any damage to the service base this year. So that's the number that we're trying to see if, that's the number that kind of makes sense on the outset. That may not be the number in the end. It may not be acceptable to people at all. I don't know. But you've sat through it for years. You have a sense of what happens when you have to lay off 7 teachers or 9 teachers, and it's spending good money after bad. So, but it's an excellent, whatever feedback you have. Even, and again, I know it's still a little bit conceptual, but that is still helpful for me in a financial group.
Jed. It goes back to the snow and ice piece. Just when you look at strategies, since we have to make decisions in a non-steer environment, that the challenge back would be is your increment or is the suggested increment too high from last year to this year? And should we ratchet that back and put that as available cash into whatever that budget offset is? The reason why I say that, because now you talk about kicking the can down the road, and any way you slice it, you kick the can down the road. One takes away cash real time today out of stabilization, whereas the other is playing with the farmer's almanac. And we look at strategies. Well, you look at strategies, and the town historically has used the strategy of underfunding snow and ice. And again, it goes back to that devil you know versus the devil you don't. The devil we know is that if we increment that, we can't take that back. So I guess that's just not that, because we already had this discussion at the preliminary, at the outset, if you will, of this budget discussion, but it's one of those. The reason why I asked for the Excel sheet through Chad was just kind of looking at the numbers and looking at the comments and looking at the thoughts. Where are you folks really thinking? Because you're dealing with a lot of data and a lot of variables and a lot of unknowns. But when it gets down to brass tacks, and as we get down to the eve of the annual meeting, notoriously we're sitting here saying, okay, this is what we have. We're brokering together. That's what we did last year, and that's what I think we'll do this year. One of the areas that I'll look at is just that discussion.
I agree with you that if we are going to use, we should, stabilization funds, I think the way it was conceived of last year makes the most sense, where you would use it on the recap sheet to offset, you wouldn't put it in a budget per se, or
Right.
transfer it to a budget, you would use it as an offset on the recap sheet, in terms of, overall revenue, so it wouldn't be, so I think that's probably the way to do it, but, I know it was a convenient approach last year to look at it in the context of a significant snow and ice expenditure. The problem is that that's not a whole lot more, maybe 20%, again, 100,000 here and there, it adds up, but it's not significantly more than what has been the history. So at some point, it would make sense to make some progress on the budget side of that, not just the over expenditure side of it. But these aren't the times when you can do that, obviously. These aren't the times. And once you do it, you're right, you can't undo it. So you've got to find that that right number that you feel comfortable with protects you from a significant liability on the back end. But it's not a luxury we have right now, FY15. You're hoping for some better news?
Yes.
Just with that as a kind of just a general commentary, I don't know that personally I'm looking for better news. I'm looking to now mix the discussions that we had with the department heads, frankly, with the finite numbers, or at least from the guardrails that were established through fog. And maybe we can see clearer through the fog. With that stated, it's one of those parsing through the numbers. And I guess the difficulty that I know that, at least from my point of view and my experience, has been that until we get closer to what the final revenue picture is going to be, anything that we discuss, absent just inquiring, it's important to look at where the salary increases are tucked in. Promotions, police officers, how many physical officer positions are we looking to hire and add, and how much of that is the budget, and how much of that is now versus can that be put off, or same with the fire or any other department. It's important to see the impacts of nips and tucks. I think as we look at right-sizing departments, and that's increasing or decreasing depends on the need of the community. I think it's important to contemplate that if any lost job without good due diligence, at least on our side, at least my opinion again is on our side, it is a job lost for naught. And then to that end, just don't raise my taxes. So I have to balance both of those issues. And as we look through the numbers, it's less about crossing my fingers. It's more about really annoying the crap out of you through Chad. Just being honest.
Well, I'd rather deal with Chad than you, so I think it makes sense.
That's right. I knew that when we were talking about the reorganization, so it's all good.
Well, I agree with your comments. And one of the we go through exercises, and you've done them in the past, and you look around and you say, well, who's retiring next year? How many bodies, and how many, and well, geez, if we closed town hall, just didn't open on Fridays, how much of that? And you add all that stuff together, and it's like, wow, that's just not a lot of money. And because most of the money is in your essential service. It's in public safety, and it's in education. And it's where it ought to be. That's where it should be. And the rest of what we do should be is comply with the requirements of state law as legally and as efficiently as possible. So, and for the most part, I think the town does that. And most towns that's what they've had to do for 20 plus years now. So I don't think we're any different in that regard. But I think, like I mentioned with the DPW, possible DPW, or whatever the outcome of that's going to be, and, there's some opportunity to save money in the short term, perhaps in the long term. I don't know that same opportunity exists, for instance, in the police department. You have some, right now, one of the reductions that has been made from the budget request was for some additional staff, which the department really could use, but it's just not fundable this time. And so, you know, without a longer-term look at what is, you know, what department, you know, in terms of priorities and filling positions, it's kind of hard to assess that situation. One of the things that and I mentioned this in a prior meeting, is I think it's important to get some feedback from the selectmen and the finance committee, is in terms of when there is gonna be a day, none of us may be here, but there's gonna be a day when there's gonna be some opportunity to actually meet some goals and, you know, and fill some positions again. And that should be done in a little more of a collaborative and thoughtful way than just each department, you know, kind of fighting for what they believe is appropriate to the department. Because there's virtually no department in any town that's not underfunded. That's the nature of the beast. So I don't know what the long-term, you know, projections are for state aid. I mean, when you have, you know, a huge part of every city and town's revenue, with the exception of some of the huge industrial towns and some of the extraordinary wealthy residential communities, people are kind of in the same boat. I mean, we don't know what the short, mid-range, or long-term prospects are for a huge part of your revenue. It's hard to do that kind of planning anymore. But once again, it's the nature of the beast, and we've all been at it a long time, so we know that. But once you make commitments, you can't unmake those commitments without cutting staff. That's the problem, and that's one reason why this town is one of the labor agreements have been out for 2 or 3, 4 years.
I think this is definitely a very good overview. It'll be interesting in the weeks to come as we compare what we had, what was proposed, what the differences are. And I hate to say it kind of line by department as far as, all right, you know, what does this leave them with? Kind of like Sean stated, all right, you know, they requested this many additional staff, how many does this leave them with, et cetera, regardless of the department, et cetera. So I think this is definitely good progress and, you know.
I mean, obviously, what I want to be able to provide is something that the finance committee, the selectmen, the school administration, and the school committee, and most of the department heads feel is the best of a bad situation. I mean, to the extent that everybody is, can come together around some spending plan is obviously in everybody's interest. Because the last thing any of us want is to have, you know, interest groups at town meeting, whoever those interest groups may represent, who feel slighted, disrespected, or whatever the case might be. And that doesn't lead to a good product or a good environment. And I know we all want to avoid that, so.
I think the next step would be to sit down, you had mentioned, with the old laptop, clunky old laptop, and start going through it. Obviously not today. Next week, we can start to, and you're off next week, right?
Yes.
That might-
What I will do, though, either before the end of this week or early next week, though, is I will get through the chairman, and I'm going to start getting better, seeing new stuff, or sending him just, you know, what comes out of our group discussion tomorrow, just so there's an idea of what other areas of progress that we think we can explore, so that at least in real time, people are pretty much up to date on where that stands.
If you revise this, can you just send the Excel, because that'll be helpful.
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
And again, I can send things out to the entire committee, but it's just easy for me to just worry about the chairman and Deb and let you guys handle it. If that's fine, then
I think that works.
Yeah, that's fine.
Everybody all right with that? Okay. If there's no more questions, comments on this, we will move along. I don't think we need to talk about continued business, you already covered that. Liaison reports. Review of minutes. We have minutes from the April 4th meeting. Sean, you weren't here.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the April 4th meeting.
Second?
Questions? Discussion? Like you weren't here also. Can we vote? Yeah, we can. All those in favor? Opposed? Great. Correspondence. Here is the beacon that you were talking about.
Yes.
Does anybody want this? Licky, I think, maybe do you want that?
You wanna
I've
get
seen it
one?
before, but not recently.
Yeah.
Would you like a copy?
Sure.
All right.
And I believe it's online too, so if anybody's viewing it,
It poses no
you
harm
know,
in any way, shape, or form.
We have the Community Preservation Act
I think things have not changed.
petition.
yes.
I'm sure it's available online
Yeah,
Monday, right?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to, I want to explain, I don't know how much you disseminated this information. After you met with Mr. Buckley, a woman at the CPA Coalition contacted me.
I have not sent that yet. I think that was today.
I'm sorry?
I haven't sent your email out yet.
Okay. And asked, well, didn't even ask, pretty much told me that they're ready to come down and do whatever presentation, whatever groups. I mean, it's what they do. And I've seen them, they do a very good job. My response was that I don't know that I would forward this information to the elected officials, decision, and I even explained the issue with the town being in the midst of a significant capital construction project, which will probably impact student loans and some of the playing on this issue too. So we had a good give and take. She forwarded me more information. I had some requests from other members of the board of selectmen to follow up on some of that, which I've done by email. And in fact, I got an email just today. Is that the one you're referring to already?
Yep.
That maybe just a couple hours ago that I sent to Chad, which follows up on some of that information. The reason why I'm glad you brought it up, Chad, is that, you know, that I've been through it. The CPA is a wonderful program. It doesn't mean it's the right time and the right place. I'm not advocating a political position on this. I am a conduit of information. Yes, I think it's wonderful in any town if you can get the CPA in place, okay, in terms and conditions that are acceptable. So, but I just want to be careful that I don't want people to think because I'm forwarding this information that I'm taking a political position on this. That's all. Is that a good enough disclaimer?
I think it is.
Fair enough.
Mr. Buckley also emailed me today and wants to come back in. He had some answers to some of the questions, so at some point between now and the end of May, we'll put him on the agenda to come back in. A postcard from the Mass Buys Expo. It sounds like a great time.
Yeah, it's in Worcester though. It's actually, it's a very good program run by the state. It's in Worcester, so, not that Worcester's on one side of the world, but.
A letter from the Association of Town Finance Committees.
Offering psychological assistance.
It's just and another one. It looks like it's just a newsletter. And a workshop invitation. And the municipal advocate. Anybody? Anyone? All right, it's there if anybody wants it. That is all of the correspondence. Next meeting is next Wednesday.
Dory will be,
Okay.
provide any updates to whatever we send out, so.
Great. Does anybody have anything else? Nothing else, like a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor? Opposed?
Just to be.
John, opposed?
No, I abstained. You keep forgetting if I abstained.